soul. And this is the Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and I am here today in the studio talking with Stuart Jaffe, who is an author. And welcome to the show, Stuart. Thank you so much for being with us on the air today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So Stuart and I were introduced, I believe it was through Bobby Nash, right? And so this is the first time, y'all, that Stuart and I are actually talking voice to voice. So we're getting to know each other as much as you're going to get to know about Stuart and I together, which is, I think it's always fun, man. Because I mean, I think we've been connected on Facebook for a couple of years now, and you know, it's one of those things where you kind of know somebody a little bit through the the social media lens, but you kind of really don't. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
yeah, and I think, well, like I said, Bobby Nash connected us, and then there were a couple times we were going to be doing conventions or stuff down in Georgia or wherever, but it just never happened. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the pandemic and all that, and it's like, and even like today's show, we I had to reschedule it, and you were very gracious to be flexible and reschedule. So I appreciate that, man. I'm really glad that we can, we got it worked out, and you're here today.
So, yeah, I'm excited.
Do you mind giving everybody kind of like a brief bio of like what you do? Because I know you're an author, but would you mind sharing a little bit more about?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm author of over 40 novels. I've been doing this a long time. I write in the science fiction fantasy genres, mostly in fantasy, in various subgenres, urban fantasy being a big one, some high fantasy, paranormal mysteries, that kind of stuff. If anybody out there listening actually knows who I am, it's probably because of the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries series. That's my big best-selling series, and that follows a guy who moves down to North Carolina and discovers his office is haunted by the ghost of a 1940s detective. So he does what anyone in that situation would do, and he starts a detective agency with a ghost, as you do. And
as
I
you do, that's right.
as you do. And I take real history of the Piedmont of the area, and I mix it with witches, ghosts, curses, magic. It's where I live. So I'm just talking about real places that I can go visit and give you a firsthand account of. But I also write the Nathan Cade thrillers. They're kind of John Wick with immortality. I write the Parallel Society series, which follows a gal who works in her family bookstore and learns that grandma and grandma's two elderly friends have been saving the universe for decades, and stuff like that. And then the big thing is coming up is from Falstaff Books. I'm doing a trilogy for them called the Water Trilogy, excuse me. And that, I'm really excited about that. I'm sure we'll talk about it quite a bit today, but that's a high fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of it's a mixture of those kind of fantasies with mysteries. And that's been a fun challenge to do. And I've been writing, we purposely set it up so we're going to rapid release them. So for the last year and a half, 2 years, I wrote the whole trilogy. And now we're finally at the point where on June 10th, I think, the first book comes out, and then July and then August each. So by the end of August, all 3 books will be out.
That's
30
great.
days. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, that is really great, Stuart. So you're an author. Do you do this full time, or do you work and write, or?
I'm full time. I'm what you call a hybrid author. So I'm mostly self-publish, but I do publish through presses as well. And I've been doing this. So I've been doing this a long time, almost 20 years.
Yeah,
And so when I started out, publishing was not only not viable, it was kind of a dirty word. And so you go back 20 years, and basically there were only the big, I think there were the big 6 back then, Random House and Simon & Schuster and all those guys. And so I just started out like anybody else, and I started doing short stories to break and get your name noticed and get published a little bit. I wrote short stories for almost a decade, and I got to the point where I was consistently being invited into anthologies and things like that. And at that point, I'd written a book or two, and I got myself an agent, and we started trying to sell my books.
Nice.
And that went on for quite a few years, and I reached the point of getting what sadly lots of authors get, which is I would submit it, and I forget his name, but he was at the time he was the head editor at Tor, and so he was good friends with my agent, so he would always get everything first, and his response was always, "Oh, I love this. I love his writing. I love his characters. I love his stories. I love it. Not going to buy it."
Oh.
Over and over and over. And that's all you
Oh.
get. You don't get any explanation. And it was driving me insane. And
Yeah.
eventually I kind of figured it out, and had another author who was much further along in his career explain it to me. But basically that says, you are writing at a professional level. There's nothing to change or work on in terms of there being a big glaring hole in your abilities. It's just that they don't think they can sell enough copies. They don't think it's going to be a big commercial success for them. Or, sometimes an editor will look at something like, I don't know, Harry Potter and say, wow, this is probably going to be great, but I don't personally love it so much that I'm willing to spend the next bunch of years of my life dealing with it.
Right.
So they pass.
Right.
So then it was like that for a while. And during that time period, Amazon came out with the Kindle. Ebooks, they opened ebooks up to indie authors, and it suddenly became viable. And unfortunately for me, it took me about a year from that moment till I could wrap my head around the idea that self-publishing wasn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I'd spent over a decade, I'd spent 15 some years where that was like the kiss of death. If you were self-published, everybody just thought, oh, you can't get published, so you went this route. And once I got over that, I had all these short stories, so I put together an anthology, and put that out. Had a terrible, everything you could possibly do wrong, I did. I put it out, and once it sold its first copy, that wasn't to somebody I knew.
Right.
I felt like, wow, this reminded me of how I felt when I first started writing. Like, I was suddenly excited to write again, and I just never turned back. And I just loved it because I knew I was writing at a professional level.
Mm-hmm.
And the economics of self-publishing now versus publishing with a major publisher means that you only need a fraction of the audience that Tor or Bain or you name it. They need a huge audience in order to make money.
Right.
But I only need I still need a huge audience, but not nearly as much to make a living. And so I did. and I'm a fast writer. I shouldn't say that. I'm not really fast. I'm consistent. Every day I put in the time. And when you do that, you very quickly, it's not hard to write 4 or 5 novels a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I do. And I've 40 some novels later, I have, a nice following who I just put out a book a few weeks ago, and, they just, within a couple days, it had earned all its money back and is now putting food on my table. So yeah, so there's my story real quickly.
I love it. I really do, because that, to me, Stuart, that's the goal of a lot of us. Like, I am an author. I work full time, but I also write. And I started writing fiction in like 2013. I wrote like a novel, and I never published it or whatever, but I started writing, and I didn't publish my first one until 2018. And same kind of thing, because like when you're talking about like you were writing at a professional level, I'd already been writing at a professional level, like business and academic work and journalism. And I was like, I know that I can write at a professional level, but fiction is a different thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I self-published in 2018, and I was like, this is the route that I want to go. This is the route that I want to go, because I feel that when you, for example, if we had been, let's say we came out in the 40s, like you and I, we started a publishing business in the 40s, right?
Right.
Look at like Marvel Comics or something like that, right? And we just started up from scratch, right? And then we published and we hired and we, did all these other things. The difference between that and today, I feel like, is time,
Mm-hmm.
and as you've got 20 plus years in the industry. And so you have acquired and built skills up over the years, so that now when you put a new book out, you're like, instead of it just automatically kind of like going out in the tank, you've got these folks that are like, oh yeah, I want to see Stuart's next book. I want to read it, and I feel like that's something that people get discouraged because they're like, they don't see that payoff. They don't see that immediate payoff from the, you said 40 something novels.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm sure the first one that you put out, I mean, like, even if it was a ballpark hit, I'm sure that you probably had something over the years that you're like, well, what happened?
No, it wasn't a hit. And in fact, that the first actual novel I put out, of a series, still has yet to earn. This was 7 or 8 years ago, and it has. And because I didn't know what I was doing, so I had to kind of, over time redo covers and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It still hasn't earned out. It still hasn't made all its money back, because, I mean, that's part of the thing. You learn over time how not only how to do the job and do it well, but you also, if you're going to be an indie author, you have to learn business. Yeah. And not just the business of negotiating a contract, but, the business of running your own business and controlling your costs and all that. So, like I said, I think it's had 3 or 4 covers before I finally knew how to work with an artist and get a good cover that did its job. And so, I spent way too much money over the course of those years, whereas now, for a fraction of that, I get a solid, your
covers are great.
Thing.
Yeah,
and
your covers are
thank
great.
you. But that, if you could see the original covers, you would laugh. I mean, some of them are just horrible.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, like, I know that's one of those things where, you kind of go back at your old stuff and you progress so much, you're like, oh, kind of cringe a little, right? It's like, oh, but that was it. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't have done that, right?
Oh, sure.
So, I mean, we got to go through that. Yeah, you have to kind of go through that cringe state. And I got to do the station ID real quick. Everybody, thank you today for tuning in. You're listening to the Adam Messer Show here on WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Sounding Community Radio with Global Soul. I'm here with my special guest today, author Stuart Jaffe. And, Stuart, so let me ask you this, because you've obviously been through the ropes. And on the show, everybody, if you're new to the show, thank you so much for listening. If you're listening to this live, or if you're, listening to this on the podcast, or YouTube or whatever, thank you very much. And for those folks who are listening, who have been here before, I really appreciate your support, of the radio show and, my creative endeavors, as well as, checking out Stuart, because, I mean, like, hopefully, Stuart, there'll be some new people to you too.
I hope so.
Yeah. Sure. So I want to ask you, with that, Stuart, process, right? And professionalism and managing your business. So here, when I self-published the first book, it had, I felt like it had a relatively decent reception. I mean, I didn't sell tons of books, but I felt like it had a relatively decent reception. I actually sold about 65 copies the first couple of months. And
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's not a ton of books, but it was, like you said, when it was like that first book that was outside of the folks that you knew, like, I knew about 20 something people that bought it because they knew me. And then I felt the same way. And I was like, okay, well, the reviews were coming in. I was getting some decent reviews and whatever, and then life happened, and I didn't publish the second part until like a year and a half later. Right.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
I hit the most cardinal sin of all. Right. Not just, whatever. I just completely missed the mark. The book sold 2 copies. Like, I literally think that the book has only sold 2 copies total since I took it off the market or whatever. But those 2 copies, I don't even know who bought them, honestly. But I felt like it was a better book, better produced. It was a stepping stone, right? So I took that off the market. I was like, oh man, I hit flat rock bottom on it. Then in 2020, well, actually it was 2019 when I started working on it. But I was like, okay, I need to revamp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to take a play on the vampire novel series that I was writing, but I needed to revamp, and I was like, well, I want to do an anthology, right? So I recruited different authors that I felt were, really good. I felt like that they were, the kind of folks that would be able to give a compelling story, share a compelling story or whatever. And the pandemic hit. The book was supposed to come out like in May last year. People just kind of, life happens, right? And people, missing deadlines, and I had a couple people that dropped out. I had one person that I had to kind of kick out because of the way that they were doing some unscrupulous things that I didn't really like. And so anyway, I got everything together and I launched it in October of last year. And we've had a really decent reception with it. And so, and what I did was, I took the books, my vampire books, I took them off the market. Obviously, the people that had bought them before, they still have, the copies or whatever, and that's not going to change. But what I did was I took them off the market. And I'm getting ready to republish them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a product of, me learning about the industry and me saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not doing this. You just can't you can't spray and pray, or you can't just throw splatter on the wall and see what sticks,
Right. A lot of people, especially in the beginning, have a lot of misconceptions about this job.
Yeah, that's where I'm leading to. Like, I wanted to ask you, because you said that you write about a solid 4 to 5 novels a year, and you're consistently doing that. Because I mean, like, I've known you for a couple of years through Facebook, and I know that you've published a bunch of titles since then, and so I wanted to ask you, like, the biggest challenge for me as a writer, I think, is sometimes that mojo. I don't have a problem when I'm writing. It's sometimes just getting that oomph to start writing.
Oh yeah.
And so how
well, if you ever want to meet the greatest procrastinators around, just go sit down with a group of writers. I mean, we'll.
Oh man, I had to get out of these writing groups because people wanted to talk about writing, but they didn't want to write.
But they don't want to write.
Yeah, I had to get out of it. I was like, I can't be around people like that.
Yeah, that's like I distinguish between people who want to be writers and people who want to be authors.
Yeah.
Because people who want to be authors, they don't want to write a book. They want to have written a book.
It's
and go to conventions and be a celebrity for the weekend and that kind of thing. But to actually write the book is like pulling teeth for them. Write it. So here's not to get too. This is not heavy math. But here's a little math for you. Because I think people get, when it comes to the actual productivity, I find people still see the mountain of trying to write an entire novel, and how could I possibly do that in a year, let alone 5 in a year and all that. But if you start breaking it down, it's actually not that complicated.
Mm-hmm.
All you have to do is look at yourself and say, well, how many words in a day can I reasonably write? In your case, you have a job and all that, so it's not going to be as large as mine. But most professional writers I've ever met who are full-time, on average, it averages out to about 1,000 words a day. Now, some will do more than that, some will do less, but again, average.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably average is a little higher than that, but to make the numbers easy, 1,000 words. And 1,000 words is about 4 pages. So it's not a ridiculous amount. And most professional writers, again, who are writing full-time at least, can nail out 1,000 words in about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So for 1 hour's work a day, you can get 1,000 words done. That means if you do it every day for a year, you have 365,000 words, and that's about 4 novels. And we'll even give you 2 full months off, and 5 days on top of that. So make it it's 300 days of work and 65 days off.
Mm-hmm.
You're still pulling out 300,000 words, which is 3 100,000 word novels, or in my case, that's a good 4 novels, because my novels tend to run lean. All those years writing short stories to start with, I learned how to write very concise.
Yeah.
And I do not ramble.
Yeah.
I ramble when I talk sometimes, but not when I write. And so
no, I know what you mean. Yeah, I'm the same way. Like I like brevity, and I also like leaving a lot of things to the reader's imagination.
Yeah, and we can talk about that stuff too, that on the creative side. But I think that's an essential part of what makes a good book is techniques to make the reader engage more, and not just tell them everything that they need to see.
Well, yeah, and this I like. It's so funny you say that, because like you write mystery and you write kind of like pulp crime type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I like action like that, like I like,
mm-hmm.
It's one of the ways I describe my writing. I like that action. I like setting the scene. I like, putting the characters in there, but I also like to be able to like kind of just go with my imagination. I feel like high fantasy or, some of that stuff, I know that the readers, or even like romance, if for example, the readers, sometimes they want to know like how thick the lint belly was,
right. Well, they think they want to know that.
Yeah, and
they
like,
don't.
I don't need to know that there were 1,345,000,000 hairs on this gorilla's back.
Right. So, but here's the thing: is what they really want is that sense, the classic sense of wonder that you had when you first read, Tolkien or Heinlein or Asimov or whoever you first read back when you were a kid.
Yeah.
That where it was like, where it just blew your mind. But those guys were Tolkien was, but the other guys were very, very concise in what they wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find the best writing does is it gives the reader enough so that their brain fills in all the details. So when you and the best writers do, and that's not to say that a book that's 1,000 pages long is overwritten, because there can be as long as it's a concise 1,000 words. In other words, you're not wasting words. It can be fantastic. I'm a fan of Brandon Sanderson, who writes huge books, and rarely do I find he wastes my time. There are moments where I'm like, you could have done without those 2 pages of description,
mm-hmm.
but some of the other pages are very important, because that description is so you, the reader, can visualize something that does not exist in the real world.
Right.
So it depends on the situation. I should have started with, by the way, if you or your listeners have any questions, the answer is it depends.
Yeah. There is no definitive answer, right?
It's always the answer in writing.
Yeah.
Because every writer is different, and everything I'm saying is how I approach writing. But I know plenty of writers who would cringe at everything I'm saying, because they feel just the opposite.
My friend and I were talking about that just yesterday. My buddy Josh Vasquez. And we were talking about that just yesterday, because there's a lot of folks out there who they're selling courses, or they're doing whatever, right?
Right.
And there's I call it shovels and jeans, because it's
I know the miner reference there.
Yeah, exactly, because during the gold rush, it wasn't the miners who made the money; it was the folks selling the shovels and jeans, to the miners.
Yeah.
And so and over the years, I have picked up different books. Like I love the Save the Cat series, Blake Snyder, and then I love Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel. That's one of my favorite series about, that. I love the 15 Beats thing and all. Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite ones that I've checked out, about his, zen on writing and, just listening to him and the way he talks. And one of the things that really stuck with me about writing that he said was that if you have writer's block, it's your heart telling you that, hey, it's not the right thing for you. And when you're describing, that conciseness, that is my goal. That's how I write. That's what I like. I do like when I'm writing to kind of salt and pepper, maybe a little, like with this vampire thing. Like I'll have a scene, and then like sometimes I'll have like a little bit of lore interspersed with like somebody's character flaw, or something that they're doing. It's like, oh, okay, well, this is like, this might be a misconception about vampires, and this is what people think, but this is actually what it is. It's just me kind of going back and forth, and then I'll go back, and if it doesn't make sense, I cut it. Right And I feel like this, I don't know how to say it, but I feel like that you can eat the same, like if you like meatloaf and mashed potatoes for dinner, right? You can have meatloaf and mashed potatoes. It could be like your favorite meal, because meatloaf is like one of my favorite dinners, right?
Okay.
You can have meatloaf 1,000 times in your life or whatever, and each one can be different. And sometimes the meatloaf is going to be really good and juicy and tender. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's going to be like kind of just dry, or maybe it's not warm enough or whatever. I feel like that's the same thing with storytelling. It's not going to be the same from day to day. But I feel like that consistency you're talking about kind of helps.
For the right? You mean your ability to write from day to day?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, because it's the same thing as like a recipe.
Really what makes a professional writer is you don't give yourself the luxury of sitting around waiting to be inspired, or you sit down and you write. And some days I'll nail out 2,000 words in an hour and a half in the morning, and I'm like exhausted, and I'm happy it was easy, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to take the rest of the day off. And then there are days where I'm writing till 10 o'clock at night just to get even close to 1,000 words, because everything is just like, I write a sentence and I'm like,
it's like chewing on fat.
Yeah. I mean, it's terrible. And I mean, that's the way it goes. I mean, there's an acronym BIC, which stands for butt in chair. I mean, that's really it. It's nothing more. I mean, there's a lot more to doing a good job of it, but in terms of getting the output, the productivity, it's just sitting down and doing it. There was a long time ago, there was back in the days of music television, there was a show where they had, big stars come on and do a little concert, and they would tell the stories behind the songs that they wrote. And there was John Cougar, if you remember him.
Yep.
He was on, and I'll never forget. He said he was asked how he came up with all these hits, and he's like, no, you don't understand. For every hit you ever heard by me, there are hundreds of songs you will never hear.
Yeah.
He said, I only succeeded through tenacity. I just sat down and I wrote song after song after song after song, and some of them thankfully were good.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I've never forgotten that, because that's how I feel. Is I sit down every day and I write word after word after word. And some of the sentences, when I edit it later, I'm like, I'll surprise myself. I'll be like, wow, that's a really good sentence. That really is effective moment or scene or anything. And there are other times where I'm like, okay, we're going to redo that because that is terrible.
Yeah. We've got to do the station break, and I really enjoy it. I think after the break, why don't we talk about the difference between, like you said, with writing and being an author, and then let's start adding the publishing side to it, because that's like the next step, right? It's like,
sure.
You got to write a story, and then, you got to get it done, but then the publishing is like a whole nother ball wax. So, all right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Adam Messer Show here today with my special guest, Stuart Jaffe, who is an author, and just stay tuned. We got the station ID.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming. And it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going. And you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
This is a message from the Georgia State Department of Public Health. There is a State of Georgia hotline people can call with questions or if they think they may have been exposed to the COVID-19 virus. It is 1-844-442-2681. If you believe you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 or have been exposed to the novel coronavirus, please contact your primary care doctor, an urgent care clinic, or your local federally qualified healthcare center. Please do not show up at an emergency room or healthcare facility unannounced. More information can be found at dph.georgia.gov. This portion of WRUU Savannah Soundings programming is provided by listeners and by Brighter Day Natural Foods. Brighter Day Natural Foods has been serving Savannah's healthy food and supplement needs since 1978. It is located at the corner of Bull Street and Park Avenue. They have available online ordering and curbside delivery, and now a walk-up window for smoothies, juices, and sandwiches from the deli. They are open from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and 12 to 5:30 p.m. on Sunday. More information can be found at brighterdayfoods.com.
WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming. And it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going. And you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
All right, and we're back live on the air. So, Stuart, how you doing, man?
Hey.
I am really excited having you here. And you know what's really cool, everybody? We were just talking off air during the break, and Stuart, you had a podcast?
Yeah, a long time ago, in the beginning, early days of podcasting. My wife and I started a show called the Aquatic Review, and it was a weekly half-hour show. And my wife, she's retired now, but at the time she was a scientist. She's a conservation biologist.
Nice.
I'm a writer. So we wanted to talk about science and art and the meeting of the two. And so the first half of the show would be the two of us just having a discussion about some topic that one of us would have researched for the week. And then the second half was just reviewing books and movies. And
Nice.
we did that for like 6 years, almost 400 episodes. And we started it when I say the early days of podcasting where people didn't even understand. People would be like, do I have to have an iPod?
Right.
You know, that whole time. And so as a result, when we first started, when we were starting, there was, it was like the early days of, it was like why I wish I had been in, indie publishing with books a year earlier, because there was no competition.
Right.
So we would consistently in our subcategory of science and art and all that, we would consistently be in like the top 10 on iTunes, because it was just a bunch of indie people.
Right.
And then within a year or two of us starting that, Battlestar Galactica, Ron Moore, they started that show, started having a weekly podcast about the show. And of course, that was done at highly professional level with highly professional equipment.
Yeah.
And then NPR and all the suddenly everybody was doing it. And once that happened, we just got shoved out into the,
Yeah.
but we built up a really big, I mean, we had like at our height, I think we had 13,000 people listening weekly to us.
Oh, wow.
Which, yeah, I mean,
like honestly, like it's crazy. Like in today's numbers, that's like a drop in the bucket, but it is still a massive following. I mean, like for me, like I would, dude, if I had 12,000 listeners right now, I'd be like, what? And then there's other people out there they've got like like millions of people or millions of hits, or they put a video out and then like in an hour it's got 1 million hits. I'm like, really?
Well, but here's the thing about stuff like that, though, and this goes back. We were talking earlier about new authors and looking at me. I put out a book and I can earn back in a couple days.
Right.
But
it didn't happen like that overnight. You put the work
thing.
in.
and that's true of like all the YouTube stars and all that.
Yeah.
You see these people who have 2, 3, 4 million people following them. If you look, they've been doing it every day or weekly or whatever their schedule is. They've been doing it consistently for years.
Yeah, like the overnight success that took them 10 years, right? I've seen that over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the truth. There are always exceptions. There's always going to be somebody who they put out their debut work and suddenly they're a billionaire.
Yeah.
And it does happen, but that's not a career. You can't plan a career off that. That's just winning the lottery.
Yeah.
The rest of us build it, and I built it. I didn't wake up one morning and have 40 books out. I put out one book and it did nothing. I put it, and I can remember being, celebrating each little victory. So I was really excited when I was selling, a book a week.
Yeah.
And then, my next goal was to get a book every other day. And then, so that's only 15 books in a month. Total.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And again, I only had like 3 titles. And then I want, and so that took a while. And then once that happened, I wanted to get a book a day, average a book a day, not literally get a book a day, but just average, so that at the end of a month I'd sell 30. Then I wanted to literally get a book a day, and it just keeps going. And now it doesn't change though. Now, I consistently sell, 30, 40, 50 books a day. And I want, to get to that next thing. And
that's
you just
awesome, man.
You have to do it little by little and win over readers one by one.
Yeah.
And not every book is a hit. I have 40 some books out there. The Max Porter series is now 14 books long, and those 14 books are half of my yearly income.
That's awesome.
The other, whatever that makes, 26 books are combined are the other half. So clearly those other books, some of them only sell 1 or 2 copies a year, and some of them sell, hundreds of copies a year. It just depends on the title and the audience. I mean, you said you wanted to start talking about the publishing aspect.
Yeah,
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is like a good segue into talking about publishing, because with and I've only published a couple of titles where it was not me, right? It is a different ball of wax, in my opinion, because you have all these different things that go on, and even when you're self-publishing, that's your business, and I feel like I want to treat my publishing as its own entity and say, hey, this is how big business treats theirs. This is how people that are doing what I want to do treat their business. This is what I need to do, and this is how I need to, continually learn, because it's an industry and it's a business. It's not just there's no, like you said earlier, there's no like magic formula to it. I know you didn't say those words exactly, but when you said it depends, there's no answer. I mean, like, you can follow the same exact, like you could tell me everything that you've ever done, Stuart. I can follow that to the letter. Exactly. I could have you mentor me every week. I could have you, work with me every week. it's still not going to produce the exact same results. It's going to have a varying, outcome.
Well, and that's by necessity, because your books are not my books.
Right. We're different people. Even if I follow your footsteps exactly, it's going to have a different outcome. It might have a similar outcome.
This has been true of the meeting of art and commerce since forever. And, the proof that there is no magic formula is that if anybody had it, they would only produce hits.
Right.
Right. There would never if I knew how to make every book a bestseller, why would I not do that for every book? And even the best, you name whoever you think the best-selling author is, they have books that don't do as well as others. It just is.
How do you feel about the publishing industry, with your business? Because we were talking about writing and,
right.
Bic.
You mean how do I approach it, or how do I feel about
No, I mean how with the difference between writing and publishing, in the industry. When I say industry, I'm just talking about, publishing books, book being
publishing. Well, you have to wear two hats. You really have to separate when you are writing a book. You're the author. You're the writer. You're the
talent
artist.
or the
That's
face.
the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
And that's where you get to put in your emotions and your whatever your creative vision and all that. But when you put on the other hat and you're now a business person who's a publisher, I know this what I'm about to say. I've said this on panels at conventions. Now you can see people cringe, but this is the truth. They're widgets.
Yep.
They're no longer pieces of art that you created. They're no longer they're widgets, and you have to sell widgets. That's the job.
Yeah.
And that's what people forget. I just recently was talking to an author. He was asking me. He's about to get into. He got his first publishing deal, and he was asking me a bunch of contract questions. And one of the things he was really concerned about was in the contract it said that the publisher had the final say as far as the cover and title go, and he was all concerned about that. And I said, that's standard. That's going to be everywhere. No publisher is going to give that up.
Right.
And I had to explain to him that this is a widget. And while you, the author, you're going to want the cover to show your character and this, your favorite scene or the thing that you think evokes the book the best and gives this message. And that's why you worked on the title so hard. But the publisher doesn't care about any of that. The publisher's job is to create a package that makes people buy it. They'll read the book and get your heart and your artistry and all that.
Yeah.
But the cover, which is the biggest part of the visual package, is not supposed to show the best scene from the book or any of that. It's supposed to basically say to somebody who's looking, nowadays online at
the thumbnail
12 covers on a screen, or somebody who's at a bookstore walking through, it's got to stop them
buy
from
me,
looking at all the other books.
Yeah, exactly. Buy me.
And it says buy me, but it specifically says, I am this kind of book.
Yeah.
And if that's what you like, this is for you. So, which is why when I'm walking by, if I look by in a bookstore, I don't even need to look at what section I'm in. If I look and I see a bunch of bodice rippers on the cover, I know those are not books I'm interested in, because I'm not a big romance reader, right?
That actually happened with my buddy Josh's book, the zombie novel series. I was looking at the post-apocalyptic section, right?
Right.
And I looked at the covers, and they were riddled with romance novels. And I was like, I told my buddy, I was like, this is one of the reasons why, because his book came out new, and it's still kind of we're pushing it and we're trying to push it out there or whatever, but it hasn't broken into the top 100 new books yet, and I was like, well, that's because when I looked at the categories, post-apocalyptic, which you would think would be zombie novel type stuff or whatever,
right,
or futuristic sci-fi type stuff, and it was full of romance titles. And I saw that just from the covers, just looking at the cover saying, oh, okay, this is another romance title. And, so yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The cover is that's the first impression you have of a book.
Absolutely. That's what's going to stop somebody. Then maybe the title. Then, in the days of physical books, they would turn it over to read the back cover copy.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the case of Amazon, they'll click on it and maybe read the description. And then if they still haven't bought at either of those steps, then they might open the book up and read a sample of the beginning, see what kind of the writing is. And those are the steps, of their interest. But you never get past step one if your cover is giving the wrong message.
Yeah.
And
not delivering on that promise or the premise, right?
Yeah, and that's why. So I've said to people, don't worry about if the character on the cover art doesn't exactly match your character, or your character has a gun but it's the wrong kind of gun, or as long as the message is clear. Now, obviously, if the cover has a main character with a musket and the book takes place in 2027, something's wrong. And that's also giving the wrong message.
Yeah, you're putting the reader in the wrong time.
Yeah, but all things being equal, I see it all the time where that writers think they know, because they know their book, they think they know how to sell their book, and they don't.
Yeah.
And that's something I had to learn, and I'm still learning. That once I started self-publishing, I realized, this is like being back at step one again. I knew how to produce a book, and I knew how to put it online, but in terms of marketing it, in terms of doing what a publisher really needs to do, I had to learn, and I learned it the hard way, just like anybody else. I'm still learning, because especially nowadays, the business is constantly shifting and changing.
I completely agree with you. I've got to do the station ID. Everybody, you're tuning in today. You listen to the Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer, with my special guest, Stuart Jaffe, and we're talking about writing and the business of writing and publishing. And you're listening to us on WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Sounding Community Radio with Global Soul. And we got about another 8 minutes or so for this hour, Stuart. With that, when you're talking about that, so my undergrad's in business, I have a master's in business, and that is one of the things that I feel is so important with anything that you're doing. When it comes to, like, we're in a capitalist society, in the market, the products will rise up, right? And they will, for you, you went from trying to sell, or trying to make, one or two books every other day to, 1 to 2 books a day to 30 to 40 books a day, and you have some titles that are doing better. You have some of your IP stuff, your intellectual property stuff that's carrying, your, like you said, with Max Porter, it's carrying, like, your author sales,
right?
Your book sales. When it comes down to the business side of separating the art from the product, you were just talking about with covers and, that creative, I guess, not entitlement, but I'm trying to think of the word, because I can think of it, but I can't think of the actual thing. Basically, when you have like the contract for the publishing house, they have the final say. So the creative licensing or whatever. I feel like you just hit on a major point with any creative person, or just about every creative person I've ever. We all, as artists or creators, we kind of like to drink our own tea, right? And I think that sometimes people, it's like, hey, you could say, hey, Adam, I like what you did there. Did you ever think about doing it this way?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think it might be a good choice for you to do it this way, because if you do it this way, then you're going to be able to get XYZ done. Right.
I think a part of the problem for writers is that we often confuse the story we've told with the book as an object.
Right, the widget, like you said.
Right.
Or the product, like I said.
And that's the thing. So, it's a little bit easier, and I suspect a younger generation might not have as much problem. I'm almost 50, so I grew up, there were just books, right?
Right.
You didn't, there was nothing, that's how a story was told. And so you start, in your brain, you equate this physical object of a book with the story that somebody crafted for you to read. But the fact is that now we have ebooks, we have audiobooks, and there are other ways people can get that story. And I have people who exclusively listen to me on audiobook. And I've had other authors be like, doesn't that bother you, like that they're not getting the actual book? And I'm like, no, that's the story I wrote. They're just hearing it. I don't care what medium it comes to them.
I love audiobooks. I mean, like I love audiobooks. My friend turned me on to them about 5 or 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love audiobooks because he has ADHD, and so it's for him to hold a physical book or an ebook,
right,
it's almost impossible to keep his attention. The audiobooks, though, he's able to listen to them in the car or wherever.
I have a lot of fans who have read my stuff just driving back to and from work, and I'm like, I'm happy. That's great. And from a business standpoint, it's really great because audiobooks are far more lucrative than any other thing. But I think writers tend to just not get that, and that they're so they want to control their art, and they forget that whether it's an audiobook or a physical book or an ebook, that's not their art. That's just the delivery mechanism for their art.
Right.
And that's why cover art matters, but it doesn't matter that the writer gets their way. What matters is that the people who know how to make a good cover make a good cover. And if you happen to have both skills, so this is one of those weird things, or one of those things you have to learn if you're going to be an indie author, is of course you have to start learning. You have to become the art director.
Yeah.
You end up having a lot of fights with yourself, right? Because the artist in you is like, I want it this way. And the publisher in you is like, well, I just want to sell it, so we need to do it this way. And the art director is like, well, here's the best I can do. And, for the amount of money you're willing to spend, and you just go back and forth. But so my little side note that I'll tie back in, my undergraduate degree was in directing theater.
Oh, wow.
And so, I ended up coming to writing because I started writing plays and that kind of thing.
That's incredible.
But so I started writing. I was directing theater for a long time, and I went to a small college, so which was great because that way, with their directing program, you had to take courses in every aspect, like of putting a show together. So I've been a lighting designer, I've been a costume designer, I've been a stage designer, and understood, not that I was good at all those things, but I at least learned about them so that when I was directing a play, I could communicate with these people.
It made you a better director by understanding the roles that they were doing.
Right. But also, the key thing here, and this is how it ties back in, is I learned how to communicate with these artists.
There you go.
And what I learned there, I use whenever the illustrators I work with and the graphic designers that I work with for cover art, they love working with me because I give them what they need and my expectations are what they should be. And then what I mean by that is, in terms of what an artist needs from a publisher, is they need to know the tone of the cover, the genre, obviously, the mood, the emotion you're trying to evoke. Yes, if they want to know how many figures and a lot of technical little things, but mostly they don't want to be micromanaged. They want to be given an overall concept of what you're trying to accomplish and let them do their job. They're the ones who have spent years at art school.
Right.
They're the ones who, if I draw it, it's going to be stick figures. So I want them to draw. I'm trying to get them to draw it. And if I've done my job correctly, and this is where expectations come in.
It's kind of like you wouldn't ask a chef. You wouldn't tell a chef how to prepare their signature dish.
You might say to them, I love Italian food, and I want one with cheese and some kind of great sauce.
Yeah.
And that's all you give them. And then if you've done your job right, and like I said, this is the expectations, what you get in return looks nothing. I'm talking about the cover right now. The cover should look nothing like what you want, but be exactly what you needed.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
And that's a great breaking point for this hour, Stuart. We're going to come back in this next hour and talk exactly. I want to continue that. Where can people check out information about your books? Where's the best website?
Well, my website is simply stuartjaffe.com. It's StuartJaffe. And of course, you can just Google me or go into Amazon and put my name in, and you will find me.
Awesome. I really have enjoyed talking with this hour. I'm looking forward to the next one too.
Me too.